Okay, this is actually one of my favorite pieces. And it's a story of my life and the story of many other people's lives, because a lot of people who come here see this and they just love it because they also think it's the story of their lives. It's just one goddamn thing after another. Isn't it?
It's done. Why were you at? Yeah. Are we ready to go?
I was flying between Saskatoon and Vancouver and injured my leg on the plane. I fell, hurt my left leg, and it really got to a point where I was bothered by it.
For 30 years, I had been rolling up my sleeves giving blood as a blood donation. And one day when I went in, I was told that my sample was suspicious and that I couldn't give blood.
I had an inkling something was wrong. And so there was always an excuse not to get a medical checkup, get a blood test. That seems so mundane.
I was 6 years old. I was playing around the house with my brother Brett. I don't know, I was just playing around, jumping from a chair to a chair and fell. When I got to the hospital and the doctors did an x-ray, they noticed that there was something going on in my leg and they wanted to get further diagnosis from Halifax.
Got a phone call from my doctor to say, I think you should come in, and I did. And she said, there's something on your mammogram.
It got to the point I was having a lot of trouble walking, and it was constantly itchy. And it was about, I would say, a good portion of my thigh that was just starting to raise and get very warm to the touch. And when they realized that it wasn't healing, we went to the doctor. And the doctor said, you know what, it's probably inflamed tissue, so give it another couple of weeks and let it rest.
When I was training as a yoga teacher in Kerala, which is in South India, I was literally in this classic pose at the end of the class, which is called Shavasana, which ironically is the corpse pose. When you're literally on your back, and it's a form of relaxation. But an hour later, and I was still on the floor with my eyes closed off on my back. I essentially collapsed.
We began to realize that perhaps my lack of energy was not due to not having sunlight by being in a hockey arena with my kids a lot of the time, or from working too hard, but that in fact I had very low hemoglobin levels.
And I needed an MRI, and that takes weeks. And of course I'm going along with the idea that God is not going to do this to me, because I have had my share of tragedies this year.
I went back to Toronto, got myself checked up, and when the doctor came back with my blood report, she literally stood up from behind her desk and she said, "How are you even standing?"
I was rushed to Halifax a few days later and lost my leg shortly after that.
Dr. McQueedy comes in and he said, I'm afraid that you have cancer.
It kills 7 million people each year. It affects 1 in every 4 of us. We've been fighting it and searching for a cure for centuries. The science, politics, and emotions surrounding it are as complicated as the disease itself. Yet, for all the focus it draws, cancer continues to plague humankind. Countless hours, countless dollars, and countless lives have been spent in the war on cancer. Begging the question, where are we in the fight against cancer? You can only understand where we're at by looking at where we've been. The fossilized bone tumors found on some mummified remains from ancient Egypt is known today as osteosarcoma. A papyrus from the same time describes ulcers and tumors of which there is no treatment. And while the Egyptians may have first identified it, it would be the Greeks who named it Carcinus, an apt description of the mass and its leg-like projections evoking the image of a crab. Roman physician Celsus would later translate the term into cancer, the Latin word for crab. Romans would also use the Greek term onkos to describe swelling tumors. This would later be used in part of the name defining cancer specialists, oncologists. Greek and Roman doctors would put forth the humoral theory, which suggested the body had 4 fluids that when imbalanced would cause disease. This idea would go unchallenged for centuries. But it was more than scientific knowledge that prevented progress. Throughout the Middle Ages, religious dogma prohibited autopsies and the study of the body, and our understanding of cancer lay dormant for decades. That was until the 1700s, when a new theory, the lymph theory, suggested that cancer was composed of fermenting and degenerating fluid called lymph. Around the same time, some believed cancer to be contagious, an idea that caught on throughout the 17th and 18th centuries. But it was 1838 when German pathologist Johann Müller showed that cancer was made up of cells, not lymph or contagion. Müller's student Rudolf Virchow would later determine that all cells, including cancer cells, are derived from other cells. Virchow also proposed the chronic irritation theory, but believed incorrectly that cancer spread like a liquid. In 1860, another German, Karl Tirsch, showed that cancers actually metastasize through the spread of malignant cells. Today we know cancer is caused by viral and chemical carcinogens, oncogenes, and tumor suppressor genes that have malfunctioned. But this is a relatively new understanding when you consider most of the advances leading to these conclusions occurred within 150 years. It was 1882 when William Halsted performed the first radical mastectomy to treat breast cancer, which remained the standard operation for the disease well into the 20th century. X-rays were only discovered in 1895. Around the same time, Marie and Pierre Curie discovered radium. In 1902, Theodore Boveri postulated that chromosomes were distinct and transmitted different inheritance factors. 1913, the American Society for Control of Cancer is formed by physicians and businessmen in New York. In 1928, George Papanicolaou discovered that cell samples taken from the vagina can reveal the presence of cervical cancer. This leads to the development of the Pap test. Between 1944 and 48, Avery McLeod and McCarty would identify DNA as a basic genetic material of cells. Sidney Farber demonstrated that aminopterin inhibits the growth of acute leukemia cells, and George Hitchens synthesized 6-MP, an antimetabolite that will be used in the treatment of acute leukemia. In 1950, Winder, Graham, and Dahl linked cigarette smoking to the development of lung cancer. And in 1953, James Watson and Francis Crick discovered the molecular structure of DNA. That same year, Carl Nordling proposes that cancer cells contain mutations in a number of different genes, and that cancer-inducing mutations accumulate as a person ages. In 1961, Till and McCulloch discovered cancer stem cells. 3 years later, in 1964, the U.S. Surgeon General first issues a report stating that cigarette smoking is a health hazard. And the war on cancer isn't declared until 1971, when President Richard M. Nixon signs the National Cancer Act. 10 years later, the first human cancer prevention vaccine is introduced, the hepatitis B virus vaccine to prevent liver cancer. 3 years later, Dr. Tak Mak discovers the T-cell receptor, the holy grail of immunology. Throughout the 1980s, Bert Vogelstein would develop experimental approaches to study tumors. His model for tumorigenesis suggested that cancer is caused by sequential mutations of specific oncogenes and tumor suppressor genes. In 1998, the FDA approved Herceptin, a drug for the treatment of breast cancer, which Dr. Dennis Slayman and team spent more than 12 years researching and developing. There have been more advances in the last 20 years than in the previous 2,000 years. We've witnessed a flurry of new treatments, new drugs, the list of curable cancers getting longer, yet the global cancer rates continue to grow. We know more about the disease now than we've ever known. So after all this time, after all this progress, the question remains, will we ever see a day without cancer? Top researchers, doctors, a massive global community focused on conquering cancer have gathered here in Montreal at the International Cancer Congress.
The goal of the ICC is to decrease the human suffering caused by cancer, to do that as soon as possible. And the final goal, of course, is to be able to win the battle against cancer. Cancer is becoming a looming disaster in the developing world.
The diseases that people are suffering and dying from are very different from region to region across the globe. 1/3 to 40% of cancers are tied to infectious processes. And in sub-Saharan Africa and some parts of Asia, those numbers are very high. In North America, they might be about 5%.
You know, when one goes to Africa, which has right now 15 linear accelerators for the treatment of cancer with radiation, some of those linear accelerators can't even be used because they're not in a stable electrical grid. And when they are used, they burn about $2,000 a week in electricity.
The approach to treatment mainly is so expensive that developing countries will not be able to cope.
Cancer is still, in many countries, a taboo subject. And the reason why it is a taboo subject, because it literally is a death sentence. In Jordan, when my son had his leukemia, many rumors were around. And many people said, oh, you know, she's young enough. It's okay, she can have more children. So automatically they assumed it is a death sentence. It is a death sentence if you happen to live in a country that does not have access to cancer treatment. The world of cancer, as you know, is so expensive. I always say it has many zeros to the right-hand side, everything from the machinery to the staffing. You can't just do with a normal nurse, you need an oncology nurse. It's just the world of cancer is full of zeros. And of course, to top it all, the medicines are so expensive.
I think like the HPV vaccine, it's very important that we all push it forward so that that will be cheap enough so it will be implemented in low and middle income countries. Well, you can actually save around 500,000 women every year.
Even though the conference focuses on global issues, it fails to attract the attention of the media. Instead, the top story is this.
Thieves in Canada may have pulled off the sweetest heist of all time. Millions of dollars worth of maple syrup has been siphoned off from storage in Quebec.
I look today at the newspaper and I don't see any news about the cancer conference. It's totally eclipsed by the election. We are competing by other supposedly more in-the-moment news.
The conference doesn't get any real attention until the second day, with the arrival of a special guest.
He is one of the world's most famous athletes for an unprecedented cycling career for the yellow jersey for surviving a deadly disease.
My name is Lance Armstrong. I am a cancer survivor. I've been asked to come up here and talk about my story of survivorship. I'm a father of 5, and yes, I won the Tour de France 7 times.
Despite scandal and controversy, crowds fill the room. And while Lance was unavailable for comment, in hindsight, it was probably a good thing. There's no doubt Armstrong has raised awareness, money, and garnered global attention for his cause.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for having me. Live strong, everybody.
But a bright spotlight leaves a lot of people in the shadows. Mary Gospodarowicz is the incoming head of the UICC.
The thing that struck me the most is how much that we actually do know. I think we need to realize, as we call for more innovation, we know a lot. The other thing that was absolutely striking is the willingness to partner and collaborate. It's actually unprecedented. And the third thing that was striking was the passion. The passion in this Congress, the passion for action, the passion to actually accomplish something.
But her day job is leading one of the world's top cancer centers, the Princess Margaret in Toronto, Canada.
We are making tremendous progress, and our understanding of fundamental biology of cancer has improved tremendously. And our ability to measure the changes in the body and the genetic mutations and the way the cancer progresses has gone to the next level. And all this change in our understanding is also combined with the changes in technology, computerization of doing genetic testing faster, being able to characterize mutations in cells, on multiple cells, multiple mutations, very quickly and very efficiently.
Mary is one of the many doctors who has seen cancer care revolutionized in her lifetime. Even our understanding of what the disease is has changed dramatically in the past few decades.
Almost everything has changed about what we know about cancer. When I entered medical school and graduate school in 1977, we didn't really have any fundamental understanding about what cancer was. There was a question about whether it was a disease caused by mutations, whether it was a disease of development, whether viruses or other types of infectious agents caused disease, whether chromosomal abnormalities were causal or whether they correlated with the disease and were epiphenomenon. All of these things were open questions.
At the time that I started, the genomic era had hardly begun. We understood about DNA and what genes were, but we really didn't understand the specific changes at the molecular level in DNA that caused disease. And today, these are routine tests that we apply in our laboratories.
Cancer is in general the result of a lot of small defects in the machinery which is perpetuating life. There are different possibilities of these defects. The cancer cells are not so different from the normal cells, just they have these minute defects so that they can proliferate and they are not going to die like all normal cells after a certain period of time are dying. They are continuing to proliferate and they create a mass. A tumor means a mass of cells which should not be there but should be dead.
Unfortunately, it's a natural event. When we get hurt, our cells regenerate, our skin regenerates. Our cells proliferate, divide, and heal. The fact of the matter is that cancer cells have that same characteristic, but in an unbridled way.
When we look at how humanity has even survived from the dawn of time, it's pretty amazing that we've managed to cope with all the environmental stresses and predators and things. One of the ways we've done that is that we adapt. We adapt through mutation and selection. And so the very factors that make you and me look different from each other are the same factors which, when harnessed by cancer cells that go wrong, turn them into mutated variants of us that have a life of their own. So in a way, it's the same thing that has helped us survive, the ability to adapt and mutate over generations.
A cell can have some mutations which make it lose the necessity for growth factors to grow. So it'll start growing when it shouldn't grow. And then it will, at some point, outgrow its blood supply. When your body outgrows or doesn't have enough blood supply, it becomes what we call ischemic. That's, for example, what causes heart attacks. The heart muscle doesn't get enough blood. Cells don't like to be without blood. So what cancer cells do, though, is that they adapt to that hypoxic situation, okay, by changing their genetic program, sometimes selecting for additional mutations. So now they're able to grow in the absence of oxygen. The tumor is not just a passive observer. It's not just sitting there waiting to be treated. It's selecting for mutations all the time. It's evolution in action.
I have to say, I was completely stunned. I guess maybe it's because I'm an optimist. I don't know what it is, but I just was so stunned. And so I asked him, what the treatment would be, and then they told me I needed surgery, and then we would see with the biopsy if I needed more, and so on. So it was only when I walked out of there and we were in the car and I called my sister that I actually broke down, and I couldn't even talk to her. I kept saying, I, and I couldn't even get it out.
I think your world when you're a kid is about who's around you, and I judged my sickness based on how everyone would look at me when I was young. The doctor suggested we do a biopsy to test the tissue to find out what was wrong. I won't forget, my father kind of disappeared in the hospital. He hid in a room when he got the diagnosis because he didn't want to come back and tell me what had happened. Everyone was away, I'm alone in the room, and a few hours had passed, and my dad finally came in. They had found out later that he had really not wanted to come out. He was pretty down. A very strong African man, not one to show emotion, but really, really hit hard. And when he came in, he sat me down and he said, you know, you have cancer. And immediately, I, as an 8-year-old girl, thought, I'm gonna end up like one of those kids on the milk cartons that go missing. I just thought that kids' pictures on milk cartons meant that they weren't coming back and I'd become one of those kids because cancer meant a death sentence. We sat and we talked, and my dad said, you know what, we're gonna beat this. And there's a traditional African pact, he's from the Igbo tribe in Nigeria, which basically says, if you die, I die. And in that room that day, we made that pact and promised one another that we would do whatever we could to fight it.
So from that first indication that my hemoglobin was low, further tests and a series of scans and a bone marrow biopsy indicated that I had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So that was quite terrifying. I was devastated. And I then realized that it's just 6 letters. It's a word. It's not a sentence, and it's not going to define my life.
So finally, I was diagnosed, again, deep in the very central, deepest part of yourself. I knew something was wrong, and at a certain point, because I was so tired of, again, living with fatigue, living with this feeling of things not being right. So when I was diagnosed, I had a very strange reaction, and it was relief. Like, here I was being diagnosed with this, you know, a kind of a blood cancer I'd never heard of. Couldn't have imagined. I was being diagnosed at 37 when most people are diagnosed in their 60s and 70s. So I was already a bit of an outlier. And certainly a part of myself was in denial and in shock. But there was a very real part of myself that was relief, because I felt, now I know what's wrong, now I can do something about it. And let's do something about it.
I think I was aware, kind of overall aware, but probably as a, 6, 7, 8 years old, probably still has those questions, why me? Many years after it happened, my mom did an interview. This guy called my mom and asked her if there's anything that she remembered during those times that she'll never forget. And my mother's response was, it was while Andrew was being wheeled into the operating room, he very bravely looked at Bill and I, then looked down at his toes and said, goodbye toes, goodbye toes, goodbye toes. I couldn't possibly comprehend the bond between mother and son at that particular point. So I don't remember a lot of what happened, but I guess with dealing with adversity and dealing with this tough situation, I had the mindset to look down at my toes, say my last goodbyes, if you will, and be wheeled into the operating room and for the doctors to take them away from me.
I mean, it's been an interesting journey down the rabbit hole, and at some point or the other, it's going to happen in your life. Adversity and challenges, and certainly cancer represents a huge challenge and a huge obstacle, but it can also represent a huge catalyst for change. It's hard to paint it in black or white, this is good or bad. And while there are absolutely horrifying aspects of going through treatment with cancer, I think that it also can be an invitation to go deeper. Because obviously it's a signal from your body. It's like your body is saying, you're not listening to me. Now will you listen?
When people look at suicide in cancer, surprisingly, the highest suicide rate is immediately after the diagnosis. This is not the time necessarily of greatest physical suffering, but is the time of greatest fear. People fear death, people fear dying, vulnerability, pain, suffering. And people feel dependency, the fear of depending on other people, which in a culture which values self-sufficiency and competence can be very threatening. I mean, some people live with the fear of cancer even before diagnosis. People that have genetic risk in their families, people that have other risk factors. So sometimes there's a lot of fear and worry even before the diagnosis.
It's this socially inherited discomfort we have. You know, our grandparents, it was the C word. They didn't talk about it. Our parents started talking about it, and now all we do is talk about it, but we actually talk around it. And there's this social censorship, and it's this, you know, prescribed way of what we want to hear and say and think and do about cancer.
When I first started in oncology in the late 70s, it was almost talked about under the covers. Patients didn't necessarily get told they had cancer, or maybe didn't even want to know. And survival rates for some of the cancers were really awful.
There are other common diseases which are also fatal, which have not had that same stigma. There has been speculation about why. Some of it is about the physical manifestations, that certain of the treatments like chemotherapy cause hair loss. The disease can cause physical wasting, where people can become gaunt and malnourished. And there's pain and suffering. And it sometimes affects young people. And I think all of those things are factors that contribute to the stigma.
I can remember the first medical oncologist who came to our hospital in New Zealand was treated like a witch doctor. He used to walk down the corridors, and people would talk about him as he went down because he was that guy who came and poisoned people. Radiotherapy was talked about as all about burning and really quite awful analogies that people were using. And so the treatments were as frightening as the disease.
My biggest challenge was the stigma and the taboo. And then the cancer center that we were building there, the name of it was the Hope Center. Notice the omission of the word cancer. So that's the atmosphere that we were in. Culturally, people thought that it's contagious. They had so many myths about the disease that perhaps it would ruin chances of their daughters marrying into another family, husbands divorcing their wives, you know, all these things that, by the way, 50 years ago in the developed world, that was the same thing.
Well, 50 years ago, cancer was a death sentence, and most patients with cancer died. Cures were very infrequent.
It's easier to talk about breast cancer than to talk about cervical cancer. It's not easy to say that you've been treated and you have a bag on your tummy, or that you can't talk any longer, you have to push a button here to talk, and you don't really talk about the lives of people when they survived, like cancer and sex. If your body has changed in the inside and outside, how would a new partner look at you?
About a month into treatment, or a month and a half, I was on a pretty heavy course of steroids and chemo. The chemo actually didn't affect me as much as the steroids, and the steroids affected me mainly because I put on about 40 pounds and bloated beyond recognition. And so again, my own self-image dramatically changed. And I've been in front of the camera for so many years, and you could say I have been working in the business of, you know, using my image and my face. And that obviously, again, brings into question a lot of things, you know. Have I changed because I've changed physically, or am I just the same person? And how does that relate to how I'm going to relate to myself and how other people are going to relate to me? People don't want to be reminded of their mortality. It's tough. There are some shocking statistics where there are women in Canada who would choose not to do chemo if it means losing their hair. But, you know, you could say it goes a step further in India. A lot of Indian women's beauty is tied in with their hair or associated with their hair. I mean, Indian women have gorgeous long locks. And the idea of losing your hair is harrowing.
There was the odd person that would try to, knock me down. You're the guy with no hair. You're the guy with one leg. You're the guy with this, fill in the blank. You look at a situation and you say, why me? Or why did I lose my leg? I mean, I've asked myself those questions, and sometimes there's no easy answers. I've got a lot of confidence being an athlete with a disability that's in a sport visible as such as swimming. This one was 1998 World Championships. It was in the 100-meter butterfly. I was ranked #1 in the world going into the competition. I have no problems with anybody seeing me with my leg off when I'm around the pool deck. Why? Because when I'm in the water, that's the happiest moments for me sometimes. It's because I feel like I'm alive, I'm one. I don't need my leg, I don't need anything, I don't need nuts and bolts to go into it. It's just me in the water, and it's fantastic. In terms of being outside the water, I mean, yeah, like I'll wear shorts that probably go down past my knee because I don't want people to see my knee unit and my leg or whatever, a little self-conscious still. But maybe I'll be like that the whole rest of my life, but maybe that's just me.
My father, I found out he was a bit suicidal for a period of time because we were extremely close and things weren't looking good. So that was tough. My mother, who I learned later on suffered equally, she was the one that powered through and insisted that we distract me throughout my treatment. And after it got to that point where I was dying, and as a child I knew I was dying because I looked like a little boy, had all of the features of a kid that's very, very sick and was losing weight, and I just wasn't hopeful. And part of my demeanor was really just that sadness that comes with kids that just disappear in the night. You're sharing a room with 3 other kids and no one wants to tell you they died. And so you wake up in the morning and someone's gone. So it was a really tough time. But my father being an academic and my mom being very passionate about education, they sat down and they said, you know what, Cheech, which is what they called me, we need to look at other options for your treatment. And you have 2 choices. You have, one is to cut off your leg, remove your leg, and the other is to take out your thigh bone and put a metal rod in it. And that metal rod, they gave me the actual statistics at the time, even though I was just about 9 years old. They said, if you go with cutting your leg off, your chance of survival is much higher than if you put the rod in, because the tissue is still around and that's cancerous. And they said, what would you like to do? We know what we want to do. What would you like to do? And it was powerful at the time because my parents didn't often give me big choices in life, but I think that they were wise enough to not underestimate my intelligence as a kid who was dying. And I immediately said, I'm tired of being sick. Take it off. I don't want it anymore. And with that decision, they amputated my left leg at the hip level. After a year of treatment approximately, myself and one other young girl, her name's Roxanne, were the only 2 survivors out of the 11 kids that were diagnosed around that period. And so it was a pretty tough time.
Very soon after I was diagnosed, I chose to go public. And that was also during one of Canada's most public events, which is the Toronto International Film Festival.
I don't know. Synergy?
Food, synergy. Life is good.
And it just seemed like the best way of integrating what was going on in my personal life with my professional life. So I was gently discouraged or asked to reassess. But as I said, I couldn't imagine doing anything else because I was also tired of kind of this thin layer of deception that I was living with, you know, of trying to put on this face of normalcy, and at the same time, my life is morphing in ways that I couldn't have imagined, and why hide it? Because cancer is something that is affecting so many people, you know? What are we trying to hide? And sometimes all it takes is just being able to speak openly about it and sharing our vulnerabilities and sharing our humanness. Because that's another thing that you really come face to face with when you're dealing with cancer, is our vulnerability.
It just shocks me to this day that, you know, there's a perception of cancer still being a little bit of a death sentence. It's not as taboo as it was. It's not that people don't want to share things with you like they did in the 80s when they didn't want to touch me because they thought, you know what, I'm going to catch cancer if I'm in school with this person. Ward 3B was where all the cancer patients were. So there was children with bone cancers, leukemia, all different kinds. My best friend Jody unfortunately had childhood diabetes, and she was adopted into her family, an only child, and she ended up having leukemia. And between, I think, those two assaults on her body, she just couldn't make it. So I was with her until pretty much the end when they sent her home, and we always knew that when children were sent home, that was the end. So she unfortunately went blind and then deaf, and then within 2 weeks she passed away. So part of what motivates me is part of what motivates me is her memory and honoring the life that she couldn't lead, and wanting to be a more empathetic, a kinder, giving person that doesn't take the chance that I was given for granted.
Sometimes in science, we're not exactly wise. We allowed our definition of cancer to not evolve over 160 years, while our abilities to find cancer through screening and diagnostics evolved dramatically over even the last 50 to 60 years.
Cancer is a very complex set of diseases. It's not one disease. It's referred by a single name, but in fact, right now we know there are almost 200 different cancers, 200 different diseases.
We kind of learned about cancer as if it was one disease, and then over time we sort of slowly learned that it was at least 100 different diseases, and now we know that it's many tens of thousands of different variants on those diseases because of the different genetic changes. It's essentially a disease of genes.
We have cancers that are totally innocuous, that are simply excised, treated, and don't pose any dangers. And we have cancers that are very acute and rapidly fatal. So there's very wide spectrum of diseases.
I think it is important to realize that when we talk about cancer, we should rather discuss the different types of cancer. It is almost impossible to answer the question of are we winning the battle against the cancer, because we are fighting against 200 different diseases.
We don't talk about curing infection. We talk about curing common cold or pneumonia or AIDS or SARS. We don't think of infections as one disease. We think of cancer as one disease, while the cancer is as diverse and complex set of diseases and infections.
We are using mid-19th century definitions of cancer. These were drawings that were done by primarily German pathologists on people who were autopsied, who clearly died of breast cancer, prostate cancer, lung cancer. When we say today that this person has a 1 centimeter lesion in her breast found through a mammogram, a machine invented within the last 50 years, and biopsied with a biopsy needle that was invented in the last 25 years, and we send a small piece of her 1 centimeter breast tumor to a pathologist, that pathologist literally is saying, this looks like what the German pathologists called breast cancer 160 years ago. Now, that 1 centimeter lesion in that woman's breast may be destined to grow, spread, metastasize, and kill that woman, and if we remove it, we save her life. But it may be genetically or genomically predestined to just stay 1 centimeter for the next 50 years in a woman who's 60 years old. And so it may not need to be cured.
I think that there is a real issue about overtreatment. But it's not as if doctors are overtreating people just because they want to, do extra surgeries. The problem is that we don't know molecularly which one of these tumors is really bad and which ones aren't.
Sometimes you know that you're dealing with a patient whose life will be completely transformed by what you say, and you don't know if you have the right answer.
We are curing some people who don't need to be cured. Yes, they have something that looks like a cancer, but it is not going to spread, metastasize, and kill them.
It's a tough decision about whether to, take out the tumor and not get serious complications from the surgery, or watch and wait, see if the tumor starts to grow. The problem is sometimes by the time we find out that it's the type we should have taken out, it's too late.
Some cancers are much more resistant against therapies like chemotherapy. Why they are more resistant than some others? Why lung cancer is more resistant than testicular cancer? We basically don't know, but this is a fact.
So in 1979, the way we thought about cancer chemotherapy was really pretty primitive. We felt that cancer cells grew faster than normal cells, and with that growth advantage, we would try to identify drugs that would be particularly poisonous to rapidly dividing cells. It was a bit like trying to send a man to the moon without really understanding the laws of gravity.
It is important to realize that in some cancers, we have just a few genetic abnormalities which are driving the cancer. In others, we have many more. The basic problem is that we have been successful in those cancers where we have just one or few genetic abnormalities so that we can target them with 1 or 2 drugs, while in many cancers we have dozens of abnormalities. Basically, we would need to have dozens of different drugs, combine them in order to get the same results, which for the time being is impossible and probably will be very difficult to achieve.
The biggest barrier to progress is our capacity to do research, because if you introduce a new treatment method, you have to validate it. You have to, first of all, make sure that the outcomes are better than before. So you have to be able to evaluate every new treatment and evaluate not in 1 patient or 2 patients, but in hundreds of patients. It's expensive, it's complicated. Experimenting on people is difficult because we have to make sure that it's very, very safe, that we don't subject our patients to unnecessary dangers.
The biggest challenge today is the informatics piece. Getting new technologies implemented is great, and we've been successful at doing that. The hard part is understanding the impact of every new test and what that means to every given patient, and knowing when you have enough information or when you need more, and whether that more information is the right information that you should be using to make decisions clinically.
The drug discovery process is a very long and complicated series of events. And if you start at the beginning, you start your clock when you first formulate a hypothesis, it can sometimes take 10 years before you can actually advance that molecule all the way through the many steps of refinement in the laboratory, and then take it into the clinical trial process, and through the clinical trial process actually demonstrate safety and hopefully efficacy in the treatment of disease so that you can actually bring it to meet a regulatory standard, have the drug approved for general use. There are lots of studies that have looked at how many drugs fall out of this process because of various reasons, toxicities, inappropriate pharmacokinetics, poor pharmacology. We typically think that we might start out with 100,000 reagents early in the process We might do a chemical screen with 100,000 or maybe 300,000 molecules to identify a handful of hits. So we might identify as many as 20 or 30 hits, which might lead to what we would call a lead molecule. We might have 5 or 10 leads, and those 5 or 10 leads then might yield one clinical candidate. So it's really a very, very high-risk, arduous process. It takes a lot of patience, takes a lot of perseverance. It requires so much a dedication to problem solving because, you know, there's no drug that's changed medicine that hasn't been enormously challenging to move through that process for a variety of different reasons.
I think there's a frustration on the progress that we've made with respect to cancer treatment. I mean, there's a lot of research. We know, for example, that drugs, the likelihood of a new drug making it through to actually being relevant in cancer care is extremely low.
During the 27 years that I was at Lilly, our cancer group brought 25 new drugs to clinical trials. So that's what we call filing an investigational new drug document with regulatory authorities, or an IND. We brought 25 new drugs to the clinic, and out of those 25 drugs that were brought to the clinic, 2 drugs actually emerged into the regulatory process, were approved for use, and are now important drugs in the treatment of a variety of different cancers.
In our first drug, we will attack these cancer cells with more than 46 chromosomes and the gene rings unstable. Next slide shows you what happened in the 2 mice that are on top with the breast cancer. And after it has been treated with our drug, the 2 spots are actually gone. These are very encouraging results, but from the mice. So with the approval of FDA, hopefully soon, and Health Canada, we plan to take this drug into humans. And of course, I cannot promise you that it will work, because in advanced human cancer, there are many other questions that we have not got answers to. But we promise you, this is the beginning. There will be another drug that we will be filing for next year, and next year, and next year, until we get this done. Thank you.
There are many perceptions that there is a lot of money given to cancer research, and that with all the money that goes to cancer research, we should have cured all the cancer by now.
There is that sort of cynical view that there already is an answer to cancer, and the only reason we keep playing around with it is so that people can make more money.
When people understand how much money it costs to develop a drug and how much benefit we can derive from those drugs, we tend not to complain that much. But in essence, it costs about $1 billion to develop a new drug.
Sometimes the corporations make decisions that are business decisions, and business decisions can sometimes make it hard to feel like you're really doing the right thing. But at the end of the day, you have to worry about the corporation because they support the work.
The public should be proud of the fact that it was their investment over the last 20 years that has brought us to where we are today. And I would argue strongly and vociferously and even heatedly that the single best investment that US citizens and probably Canadian citizens as well have made by their governments in the last 50 years has been in basic biomedical research. I challenge anybody in any domain to defend the impact of the dollars spent on a per capita basis for any other area of government spending.
Controlling cancer and curing cancer is an investment rather than a cost that improves the health of population, and it actually pays off. How much we spend on weapons, on military, on fighter jets. And when you compare it to investment in cancer research, there's really an order of magnitude of difference.
I have no compunction whatsoever about vociferously defending public investment in basic biomedical research. The reason why cancer is #1 killer right now is because heart disease has gone down tremendously, and that also can be traced directly to basic fundamental research. That's why cancer deaths are higher now, because people are living longer because they're not dying of heart disease.
When I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, I spent 4 years with various drug therapies trying to get it under control, and was very successful for 3 or 4 years of chemotherapy. However, the chemotherapy, it's an interesting process to go through. At the same time as it's making you better, it's also making you sicker. And by making me sicker, it was attacking my immune system. And your immune system tries to prevent disease in the body. I was dying and needed this procedure. I could not have further chemotherapy at that time.
The surgery that they did, I was told that they did it on monkeys before they did it on me to make sure, because what happened with my surgery was they took my calf muscle. The cancer is in my femur. So they took my calf muscle and they flipped it up to where my femur would be. And they got rid of my femur. So the top part of my leg is my calf muscle. And it was a very experimental surgery at that particular time with the bone the way it was, and they put a plate in there with screws. And they gave my parents and me a 35% chance that I would survive it. And I was able to beat it. Well, that was the first time. When I was 8 years old, I thought I was done with my chemotherapy for my leg. And this was on my birthday, January 16th, 1980. I remember the doctors coming in, talking to the doctors, thinking I had one treatment left, and they told me that the cancer had gone to my lung, and I had another 35% chance to live. When I had chemotherapy, the lights had to be off. The chemotherapy didn't react well to light. So the lights are off. I'm in a dark room, sometimes by myself, my mom's not around, taking this medication. Now and then nurses would come in, see how I am. So I'm fighting this battle, this monster at the other end of the intravenous, trying to help me, and it was a very tough, dark time in terms of trying to survive. You know, you walk through this maze and it's all dark, and then finally you're starting to see the light. And thankfully I got to that point where I saw the light.
When I look back at the number of kids that were around me, many of the kids that didn't have visitors often, many of the children that didn't get that benefit of distraction, whether it was sleepovers or a lot of visitors or games or anything like that, they didn't fare so well. And so as much as it was hard to not be able to feel sad and to have my parents force me to do stuff all the time, at the end, I think it saved my life.
My mother actually died of ovarian cancer in 2001. By the time she was diagnosed, like, you know, most people who have ovarian cancer, it's really too late. So she did undergo a lot of chemo and so on, and she died in my arms. My sister had breast cancer. And when my sister found out she had breast cancer, she was visiting a friend in France, and she immediately came back. And it would have taken 3 months for her to actually get the surgery required. So I, as a lot of friends in Miami who had done a lot in terms of creating the Sylvester Cancer Center in Miami because their mom had died of cancer. So I called them and I got my sister to Miami, and that's where she had her surgery. And then went back to Montreal for the chemo and the radiation, which was very involved. She was stage 3, and we were trying to keep it, you know, not tell my mother everything because my mother already had ovarian cancer. And when my father passed away, both my sister and My mother had wigs at the funeral because they were both having chemo at the time. So when my mom died, a week later, I got a phone call from my doctor to say, I think you need to go to Princess Margaret. And I was, at the time, so sure that I was not going to have anything wrong with me because my father had passed away, my mother had passed away, my sister had cancer, and I thought, you know what, God is not going to do that to me, I know it. I mean, my experience is, that's my personal experience, but I know that for everybody who has had cancer, and I know so many people, it's a shock. It's something that you just don't know how to deal with. It's something that just happens to you and it's a big mystery that in front of you. And then if you start to look into it and you start to do research, it becomes even more frightening. It's frightening.
When a stem cell transplant was advocated and recommended for me, I didn't know a lot about what a stem cell transplant was. So what we had to do was find, first of all, a match for me. But we'll begin with my brothers and sisters, my siblings, where there's a 1 in 30 chance that they be a match. Unfortunately, they weren't. They were outside of that realm, and that's not uncommon. But as we started to move forward, it was discovered that one of my children, my middle son, could be the match for me. While he wasn't a perfect match, he was family. He had 5 out of the 6 specifics that they were looking for, and we decided to go ahead because I was getting sicker. And that's a phenomenal gift for a son to give to his father. I underwent that process of a stem cell transplant, and it's a very invasive process. So the chemotherapy was given to me. It purges the cancerous cells. I'm in an isolation room at the hospital, and I'm there for about 30 days where I don't have an immune system. So the first thing is you're subject to the opportunity for infection to get into your body, and you haven't got a way of fighting it back. So that can be fatal. When I came out and started to then live with the new cells, I have had 4 wonderful years. Unfortunately, I then relapsed, but again, another therapy, immunotherapy, was proposed for me at that time. I went through a year of immunotherapy and chemotherapy, followed by another 4 years of success to again have a relapse this spring, and I'm now under therapy for another 3 months, and I'm feeling much better. I'm a very unusual case. It shouldn't happen 3 times, and it has. It was unfathomable that this would be my fate.
My red blood cell count had dropped to such an alarmingly low level that, you know, the first order of business was to send me for a blood transfusion. You know, she said, you shouldn't be standing. You should be collapsed. You should have collapsed. And I don't take that as a testament to my fortitude or, you know, I take that as kind of an alarm bell and kind of an illustration of how much we push ourselves in today's world. I don't think it's brave. I think it's foolish. In my case, multiple myeloma is basically termed incurable. So you could say it's a chronic condition that I will always live with. And at times it comes back, and then you have to hit it with a different cocktail of drugs. And that, to an extent, is my life now. So for me, it was never a question of it going away completely, although I am very optimistic. And, my fighting spirit has, I think, maybe been channeled in a slightly different way, where I channel it more into awareness and complementary therapies that will boost my immunity, that will boost my attitude. I am not my cancer. My cancer is one little part of me. And the other thing is, what do I have to fight against? It's part of me. It's my own body. So, yeah, give me the statistics. But I'm not a statistic.
I was playing basketball with my brother in 1995, and I went up for a shot, and it came down, and my stumps snapped inside my artificial leg. And it was tough, and I had to take my leg off right away, and I'd broken my stump. And I thought at that particular point that had the cancer come back? Was the bone weaker because of it? What's going on? Is my swimming career over? Thankfully, I was able to come through it. It was just a stress fracture. But that was a dark time too, because I was on crutches for 4 months. The not knowing, the questioning, is it back? Are you back? Is that elephant in the room? Is it back?
You're keenly aware of your mortality in a way that we can talk about. But to know that at any time your body can literally turn on you is frightening. To be close to death or to have been very near death and remember that feeling, it is something that I don't think most people really appreciate unless they've had a similar experience. Now what I know is that most survivors go through post-traumatic stress. They show the same sort of symptoms that individuals that have gone to war have. And I don't know if the average person who has somebody in their life that's impacted by cancer realizes that that healing process is a couple decades long.
The stigma about psychological and palliative care. People used to see this as a sign of weakness and vulnerability and would be fearful of going for help. We now see that many people regard psychological and social care as high quality care, and people seek it out the same way they would seek out physical rehabilitation or nutrition or exercise.
There's an emotional shift that happens after cancer. There's many physiological shifts, but you go from being a patient to a person before you're a survivor. And there's a lot we don't talk about in that. And when you're a patient, this whole group of people rally around you to support you, and then you're told you no longer have cancer, and everybody thinks you should be really happy, and they dissipate, and you're left to deal with the emotional and physical consequences of what you've just been through, and you have to wait years and years and years until you're told you're a survivor. And even then, we all know the rates of recurrence, and it's a fear that stays with you. And I think you become a lot more aware of your body, and you listen to your body a lot more.
The patients now are empowered and stronger. In the old days, you would do whatever the doctor said anyway, without arguing or questioning or anything. Today, you find that the patients, they want to understand what the doctor says, the implications of it. They want to know if there's other alternatives. They know to be the decision maker themselves. But we also live in one world when it comes to communication. And people that get a disease, a deathly disease, you can die. You really search for information.
Many people have unrealistic fears, and I think most people benefit from knowing what the pathway will be, how the treatment will go, what the symptoms are, what they can expect. So information, education is an important part of it.
One of the most difficult parts is seeing patients who would have had curable disease if they'd just gone to the doctor earlier. And for me, that's been lived out by my brother, who died 4 years ago this coming February. From advanced rectal cancer. He'd had symptoms for 18 months. He had a sister who worked in the business, and he failed to tell anybody about it. And his disease has an over 80% cure rate if it's detected early. And the 18 months before, he would have been curable, but by the time he was diagnosed, he died within 4 months. And you see that. And it's frustrating, and it makes you really angry, because what was it that prevented him from doing something about it? Why is it still fearful for patients to recognise that something's wrong?
We see a lot with people not wanting to talk about uncomfortable warning signs, so nipple leakage, gas, painful ejaculation. IBS is one of the most commonly misdiagnosed symptoms or early warning signs of gynecological cancers. And so a woman goes to the doctor and she's told she has irritable bowel syndrome or to stop eating a certain food, and she's embarrassed. She thinks she's overreacted. She leaves with her tail between her legs. And by the time she comes back, something's so damn wrong that she swallowed her pride. It's much farther advanced often.
It's the men that really doesn't talk about their health. They don't think they're sick or ill. They go to the doctor too late. So to find ways to get the men to be more aware of their health and to understand that when we talk about cancer, early diagnosis is very important.
I think we began much more with whoever shows up in our hospital, they're going to have good outcomes. Well, there are a lot of people who don't show up and are dying early of diseases because we don't get to them.
And there's also a lot of fear. So in Canada, we have public healthcare system where screening for cancer doesn't cost you anything. It's freely available. All you have to do, go and be screened. Our screening rates for women in the right age group are about 60-70%, while in the 100. There are jurisdictions in the world where screening is not covered, it's not available, there's no technology. So I think as a population, we need to engage and help increase our sort of engagement in cancer control to improve the outcomes, because what we want to do is not only to cure more patients, but actually prevent more cancers, because the best way to conquer cancer is just not to have it.
Catching it early is a whole different ballgame, and there's so much we can't control when it comes to cancer. Let's do the things we can.
We can actually prevent most cancers right now, and it just drives me crazy when you hear people say that not enough's being done about prevention. Actually, I would agree with that comment, but the people who aren't doing enough are the patients, not the researchers.
They say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And in the world of cancer, it couldn't be more true. While genetic and environmental factors are a cause, a staggered percentage of cancers could be avoided simply through the way we live our lives.
I think the most promising field in terms of cancer research is the field of prevention. We're starting to learn a lot of the things that we can actually do to decrease the rates of cancer.
If we could prevent all the behavioral risk which lead to the development of cancer, we would probably avoid about half of the cases of cancer.
What causes cancer ultimately is insults to the cell. So, for example, smoking is probably the number one insult. So the number one cause of cancer in North America is smoking. Smoking causes 8 to 10 different types of cancer.
The average smoker knows that cigarettes cause lung cancer and other cancers, but they believe it's going to cause those diseases in other people and not in them. We have had some inroads, of course, in tobacco cessation, although we've not done enough, in my opinion. In the United States and Western Europe, smoking rates among men were as high as 50% in the 1960s, and now they're about 21%. For women, they were as high as 35%, and now they're again about 20%. I think a 20% smoking rate is entirely unacceptable.
We're very proud in Canada the smoking rates are very low. 17% of population smokes, which is great until you calculate that 17 is about 1 in 6. And when you look around and you think that 1 in 6 people smoke, then it becomes a big problem.
We've got to get folks to realize that people who smoke cigarettes on a daily basis inevitably end up with a medical problem because of their cigarette smoking, and over half of them die from that medical problem.
You know, this isn't a politically correct statement, but you know what? You're free to smoke, but if society is going to pay for your medical costs and treat you, then that to me is wrong. You can smoke, but if you smoke, you should pay your own medical costs. That should be part of the deal. And that's a little bit draconian, but you know what? It's incredible when I see, it's heartbreaking to me actually, when I see people standing in front of, one of the world's top 5 cancer centers. Some of them even have a chemo IV drip in their veins, and they're standing there smoking.
Tobacco is basically selling an avalanche of death to the globe. And as rates go down here, rates climb in other parts of the world.
It's been shown that the tobacco manufacturers are interested in making a profit. That's why they sell their poison. The only way that we're going to control the tobacco epidemic, in my opinion, is through government regulation.
We're not exposed to smoke in here now because we've made it illegal for people to smoke in this space.
So we could get rid of 30% of all cancers tomorrow if everybody would stop smoking.
There are other risk factors that people have: sun exposure.
Getting blistering sunburns, especially if you're a fair-skinned person or if you're otherwise predisposed to melanoma generation or other forms of skin cancer, that's also preventable.
In terms of diet and exercise, we didn't realize in the 1980s and early 1990s how important it was in terms of causing cancer.
We're still not doing a very good job. We have an epidemic of obesity. Obesity is tied to a range of poor outcomes for cancer, breast, colon, and so we have to do things there.
What we really do have to convince people of is that this tendency in the United States, Canada, and Europe to gain weight over the last 30, 40 years is actually going to push our cancer death rates up over the next 30 to 40 years. In 1970, 4% of American children were obese. Today, it's about 20%. It's increased by a factor of 5. Part of this is because of our reliance on fast food. Part of this is because of our increasing reliance on the automobile for transportation. So we're eating more higher dense calories and doing less exercise.
This is something that is absolutely inexcusable as a society, that we would allow our kids to both eat the kind of foods that are making them overweight at a very young age and not encouraging them or supporting them to get enough exercise.
If we don't control nutrition and physical activity and control obesity as a problem, many of the tremendous advances we've had in terms of decrease in mortality are going to go away over the next several decades. Breast cancer rates in Korea are increasing dramatically over the last 40 years, as they are in Japan. Many of us think it's because they're starting to westernize their diet. But if we can encourage folks in Africa, South America, and Asia to continue eating diets high in vegetables, high in fruits, I think we can do them some benefit. In terms of prevention, a lot of cancer is caused by infectious disease in Africa and Asia. A hepatitis B vaccination can be a cancer preventative. It's very inexpensive nowadays. We need to get that out to more people. Human papillomavirus vaccine not only prevents cervical cancer, but it likely prevents some head and neck cancers. It's quite expensive to use HPV vaccine right now. We need to get the price down and we need to disseminate it further.
Probably one of the most common cancers worldwide, not as common, fortunately, in North America and Canada and the US, but very big problem in Asia is hepatitis B and hepatitis C. So the major cause of liver cancer worldwide is hepatitis B virus. Eliminate hepatitis B virus and we'll eliminate more cancer worldwide than is present in all of the United States and Canada combined. H. pylori, it's a bacteria. It's the major cause of stomach ulcers and stomach cancer worldwide. Again, this has been falling throughout North America because of better sanitation, and also it's probably the only good thing about inappropriate use of antibiotics is that it kills off H. pylori. But still in Asia and in some parts of Eastern Europe, it's a major cause of gastric carcinoma. It's completely preventable. We
know a lot about prevention that we actually do not implement we stress treatment more so than prevention, and we need to start stressing prevention.
It is impossible to overestimate the importance of prevention, not only because prevention is so efficacious, but also is so inexpensive, which is very important. Prevention is the basis in the fight against cancer.
So if we combine all those things, don't smoke, don't drink to excess, and actually excess for a woman is probably no more than 1 drink a day, and for a man, no more than 2 drinks a day in terms of cancer incidence. Don't get too much exposure to the sun. Control your body weight, exercise regularly, get vaccinated for HPV, and if you're in a risk group, make sure you don't have H. pylori. Add all those up, probably 55 to 60% of cancer in North America be solved tomorrow, prevented tomorrow.
It's boring. People, it sounds like a moral homily. Eat more green, leafy, cruciferous vegetables. Exercise 30 minutes or more a day. 30 minutes of exercise every day is going to add up to 7 years to your life. And also find ways of making healthy choices easier. And I'm afraid the ugly reality is that sometimes that involves the regulatory intrusion of the state. And this isn't the nanny state rushing in to tell you what to do. This is preventing you and your children from being poisoned.
But we still grow tobacco in Canada. We still sell asbestos in Canada. Those things are legal.
This contemporary home shows how modern asbestos materials can be adapted to any style or design.
Well, just being here now in Montreal, yesterday I witnessed some discussions on TV about asbestos mines, and we know that asbestos is killing hundreds of thousands of people, but some economic interest prevents still Canada to closing down all the asbestos mines.
Canada is one of a number of exporters of chrysotile, and there are many countries in which it is legal who are buyers. And this government will not put Canadian industry in a position where it is discriminated against in a market where sale is permitted.
So I think that there, the responsibility is absolutely the responsibility of the government. We should not forget that there are also tumors where prevention is not so important. For instance, tumors in children, you cannot prevent them because they are all based on a genetic predisposition that we cannot change.
There are still cancers that present challenge: pancreatic cancer, ovarian cancers, glioblastoma, which is very aggressive brain tumor. We're not winning, and we need to make further strides. But right now, we cure 60 to 70% of cancer patients survive for long periods of time. Definitely healthcare today is different than it was probably 20, 25 years ago. Physicians have become different. We rely much less on personal experience, much more on data and information.
The future for patients who present themselves with cancer is getting brighter all the time. There is a very large explosion of knowledge tied to new genomic science, which is going to help us target and treat diseases more effectively.
So the whole concept of targeting, at the end of the day, it's about survival to ensure that we're targeting the cancer, but preservation of normal surrounding tissue, quality of life. So that balance, that's always going to be the concept that drives the cancer care provider.
The therapy for those cancers has to be individualized to take into account what's broken in each given type of cancer, which of these systems is broken and how. In much the same way as when you go to get your car repaired, it can be failing to run for a lot of reasons, and you don't want to, replace the wheel if what's broken is in the engine.
It's about the information on your individual and personal cancer. It's about knowing at the level of your DNA, specifically and exactly, what the mathematical makeup, the bioinformatics of your cancer are all about. There's just a recognition that this revolution has begun.
I see clearly better treatment. I see easier treatment for patients. I see treatment that's given on outpatient basis where people don't have to stay in the hospital, improved healing and improved outcomes. And this precision is really very rewarding because we basically don't like giving the treatments just in case the cancer may recur. We would like to actually know who will recur and just treat those patients. The improvement in imaging also would allow us to target the disease better and do the surgery, do radiotherapy only in the area that's involved and not cover the wide area just because we can't target or identify tissue better.
The eyes of the surgeon 20 years ago and the eyes of the surgeon today are very different. The hands of the surgeon 20 years ago, these hands now could very well be a robotic hand where the robot's hand is actually the size of a fingernail within a patient removing a tumor. And of course the scalpel of the surgeon today being very different from the scalpel 20 years ago. So the use of radiofrequency ablations, laser, the use of high-frequency ultrasound and other technologies other than just the cold hard steel of a blade. Enormous changes.
At each step, we are adding something to improve our understanding of the disease, apply it, and improve survival from the disease.
The mortality rate, the death rate, which is how I like to judge progress, went up from 1900 to 1991 in the United States. From 1991 to 2010, we've had nearly a 20% decline in the rate of death from cancer. So when we've actually had a dramatic drop in risk of death from cancer, we're obviously doing something positive.
If Terry Fox was alive today and got sick, he would probably survive very well. And not because there's some big biological target that is to be attacked in his disease, but because the whole way we treat and manage the disease has been refined and refined and refined.
Probably the poster child for molecular medicine is acute promyelocytic leukemia. When I started my medical training, when I was a resident, it was a death sentence. And in fact, not only was it a death sentence, it was the worst form of leukemia to get. Today, I think it's 90 to 95% curable, and probably in 10 years, you won't even be using chemotherapy for this. We'll probably just be using those two targeted therapies.
We figured out how to better treat these patients, how to subdivide them into groups that might be better treated by hormones or other kinds of treatments. So I think when you look at the time scale of decades, there's been great progress in cancer.
But it isn't just the big bang. It isn't just the big golden bullets of personalized medicine. It's doing small things correctly and improving them every step of the way. It has been a massive game of yards.
In lymphomas, we know that there are at least 30 different subtypes, and many of them can be cured today. But we have to recognize that this is not true for all cancer types. There are cancers where the progress has been much slower, much less important, and where we have still to invest a lot in research in order to be able to have in 10 or 20 years the same success in all types of cancers and not just in some.
There's cancers that are easier to treat. I don't want to say lucky enough. If you're lucky enough to get a cancer that we have effective treatment for, you're very lucky.
Some cancers can be diagnosed earlier than others. For instance, breast cancer, there we are able to have an early diagnosis like also in cervical cancer. But when the cancer is much more deep inside our body, I'm thinking of pancreatic cancer, gallbladder, ovarian cancer. It's much more difficult to have an early diagnosis, and early diagnosis is very important to be able to cure the patient. So we have to invest a lot in having better tools in order to have an early diagnosis, in order to have the same results in all cancers.
I think that A lot of the research money flows to the individuals with a proven track record who are later in their careers. Very good, very smart, very logical, makes a lot of sense. But there are young researchers with unproven ideas that are big ideas. And what we need to do is spend time finding in particular, researchers very early in their career who have very big and bold and unusual ideas.
Earlier this year, I won an international science competition. And ever since then, a bunch of people have come up to me and asked, how on earth could a 15-year-old have come up with a new way to detect pancreatic cancer? My answer, a ton of hard work, a year and a half to be precise, and a ton of failures. Now, recently I developed a novel paper sensor for the detection of pancreatic, ovarian, and lung cancer. And it's 168 times faster, over 26,000 times less expensive, and over 400 times more sensitive than the current gold standard of detection. The best part is, it costs 3 cents and takes 5 minutes to run.
The cancer medical community does not understand truly of bioinformatics and of big data, because those are going to be parts of of conquering cancer. Those are going to be the way that we deliver personalized cancer medicine. So we'll actually have to look outside the world of medicine to get some of our inspirations, some of our best ideas, and we're going to have to look at people who are the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Sergey Brins of the world for those truly landmark and breakthrough ideas.
While cynicism, charity fatigue, fear, and confusion continue to chip away at the public interest in the war on cancer, for some, it simply strengthens their determination.
So one of the things I decided to do that came to me in the middle of the night, because I'm a terrible sleeper, was I'm going to establish an award called the Gattuso Award for Passion in the Visual Arts. So it's going to be an award that's given to somebody who has a real passion and commitment. It doesn't have to be an artist, could be a curator, could be a dealer, it could be, but they're going to have to decide, thank God. Well, I've always been interested in art. I actually majored in history of art. I'm really like emerging artists, and there are a couple of reasons I love. First of all, I love to see what people of our lifetime, the artists, what the artists are creating, because it's always related to our society and the world we live in and so on. And also, you know what? I like to donate, to give money to living artists as opposed to dead artists. Not that we don't have a few dead artists, but very few. Because I think it's great to say, okay, I'm helping somebody here in the pursuit of their career. Because some of these artists are not that young, and to be an artist it requires such focus and commitment and dedication. And let's face it, they don't make a lot of money. You can see like the blues and the purples, and you just have to look at it very closely to see all the details. In Canada, between the time that you find out there's something wrong with your mammogram and the time that you find out exactly what your situation is and what your treatment is going to be, the average is 5.3 weeks. Well, Dr. McCready, who I call the caring genius, I guess he realized one day that in between your doctor's appointment and the time you get the appointment for the mammogram, the time you get the results for the mammogram, then if you need an MRI, it's another few weeks. Then you have to go back to your doctor to get the results of that. Then you might need a biopsy, which might take another week. And in other words, there's all this waiting time when really when you think about it, all the equipment is located in one central place. So why could you not do it all in one day? When I heard about this, I was like blown away. Because I remember what it was like to wait. I remember what it was like to think that the worst, because you do think the worst. You try not to, but you do. It's inevitable. Everybody will tell you that. So I came home and I was so excited. I said, Alan, this is what I'm doing from now on. I am going to help this doctor put together this rapid diagnostic center. I am going to raise $25 million and we're going to do this. It is the greatest thing that's ever happened in medicine. And so it started. I wrote to everybody I knew on my letterhead, and you have no idea, just practically everybody I sent a letter to sent a donation. And it, could have been $20 or $25,000, but everybody did it. It didn't take very long. We had raised the money, and it is now in existence today. And the most amazing thing is that after the first year of operation, of all the people, and I can't remember the exact number, who went through the rapid diagnostic, the one-day rapid diagnostic, 51% of them did not have cancer. So in other words, instead of waiting 5.3 weeks to find out you don't have it, you can find out in one day. And if you do have it, at the end of the day, you know what you have to deal with specifically. But not knowing is just abominable.
You've really dedicated a lot to this, so do you think you will continue to do that in the future?
Absolutely.
Good morning and welcome. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Paul Alofs. I'm the president and CEO of the Princess Margaret Cancer Foundation. Today, the Princess Margaret Cancer Center takes a significant step towards conquering cancer in our lifetime. We're here today to announce a transformational $50 million donation to cancer research through the extraordinary generosity of Emmanuel Gattuso, Alan Slate, and the Slate family. This incredible $50 million donation is the largest single donation to cancer research in Canadian history.
But it was the largest donation largest single donation in Canadian history, wasn't it?
I think so.
My definition of success in our lifetime is that every person who has a medical need actually gets that medical need addressed with the best science that we have at the time. There are huge disparities right now.
To feel that the medicine is just right there and you didn't have a chance to fight it. And I think that's where we want. We want everybody to have the right chance for a cure.
It's a very complex problem that we have trivialized and miniaturized to make digestible to the general public. Cancer isn't one disease. There's hundreds of types, and there's stage and grade, and they respond to different treatments, and there isn't a magic pill. And I think we need to stop selling that idea.
To actually cure a disease that will likely be with us forever is something that might be an overstretch or an overpromise. To conquer the disease, to have people live with the disease as opposed to die from it, extending life is conquering cancer. Success will be when we can say that if you're diagnosed with cancer, we know how to treat it and you'll live with it.
We want cancer as a disease to be viewed as something like many types of infectious disease. In the 19th century, pneumonia, strep throat, serious skin infections, they were death sentences in many people. It's unusual for somebody to die of pneumonia now in a Western society. We want cancer to be like that.
It will be a chronic disease that you'll live with as opposed to die from. I don't question it. The question is not if, it's when.
What I've learned over the years is that it is very complex. It's very hard to wrap your head around how we treat cancer. I can't imagine how complicated it is for a patient who comes into the system.
We need to ask the question, why? Why are so many people being diagnosed with cancer? Because the why will lead us to the source.
We need a public movement.
We can start a movement if we demand it.
We are one world, and we are all in this together.
Nobody does this alone.
Everybody's human, and you have to understand that there are difficult days and there are better days. There's always been something that has affected the health of people.
People are more scared when they told they have cancer than they need to be. Because yes, people die, but it is not like 5-10 years ago. It's more and more people surviving.
This game of yards, let's move the yards, let's measure and report, let's play the violin in public. Everybody should know how we're doing.
Hopefully, the more people realize just the story of cancer, that they might make that choice themselves to do what they can, manage the controllable.
Cancer is an invitation to go to those places, at least to understand. To take responsibility for your life. To take real responsibility for the choices that you make every day.
The biggest battles I had fought in my life is when I fought to live. Certainly, I hope nobody has to go through what I went through.
I'm a cancer survivor, childhood cancer. 20 years, that much change happened. What can happen in the next 20?
We are going to conquer cancer. I've seen the advances in my own life and my own treatment.